Hello everybody, and thank you for watching and hopefully also commenting on this presentation. My name is Christina Förster and I'm a teacher, educator and research assistant in the project Translang², and I'm presenting our research on integrating digital translanguaging into teacher education via a virtual community of practice. And this 5-year design-based research project is led by our core project team, who also authored this paper. Today I will outline the motivations, theoretical foundations, research design, results and implications of the first research iteration within this project. Well, to begin with, educational contexts today are more culturally and linguistically diverse than ever. However, traditional schooling often assumes a single language of instruction. As, for example, Gogolin and Piller have discussed, this monolingual habitus leads teachers and curricula to view students' home languages as deficits. This is problematic since research finds that a learner's proficiency in the language of instruction strongly correlates with their success in all subjects. In contrast, translanguaging pedagogy explicitly incorporates all of a student's languages into learning, which then enhances understanding and equity. Given students' digital lives, digital translanguaging, or DTL for short, using technology to blend languages has been identified as crucial for engaging multilingual learners into today's globalized, ICT-rich learning environments. Yet, teachers often feel unprepared for multilingual classrooms, highlighting a gap in teacher education that our project seeks to address. With this in mind, we are pursuing the overarching research question in the project until the end of 2029. How should learning activities in teacher education programs be designed in order to support pedagogical DTL competencies of pre-service teachers? And at this point in time, the research logic initially focuses on two sub-questions. Firstly, which design principles promote the development of pedagogical DTL competencies under the specific conditions of teacher education programs? And secondly, how can those competence requirements for pre-service teachers be specified in the process? Our work is grounded in several key theories. Translanguaging, to begin with, refers to the dynamic, fluid use of all languages in a person's repertoire. It contrasts with the view of languages as separate or hierarchical. And extending this to the digital realm, digital translanguaging involves multimodal texts and online interactions that can leverage multiple languages, a trend that research suggests has quite some potential for learning and social equity. We also draw on communities of practice, meaning groups of practitioners who learn through shared practice. In our case, a virtual community of practice brings together teacher candidates online to share experiences. Studies have found that virtual community of practice can be effective for professional development, especially when in-person professional development is limited. Methodologically, we use design-based research, or DBR for short, which combines design and research in cyclical iteration. Each cycle involves designing an educational intervention, implementing it in context, collecting data, and thus refining theory and practice. We also applied conjecture mapping to make our design assumptions explicit in the process. In developing curricular activities, we adopted a technology infusion approach, embedding digital media use across the teacher education program as recommended by Folger et al. And finally, teacher education research also emphasizes that modeling technology integration by teacher educators helps pre-service teachers build their skills and competencies. We designed this research as a DBR project, as I already mentioned. Using conjecture mapping, we developed initial design assumptions of how our interventions should work. In a first microcycle, we derived preliminary design principles from theory and prior work. Then, in a second phase, or a second microcycle, we held a critical friends workshop to get feedback. This hybrid workshop included 4 experts on translanguaging, international education and ICT in education, and 2 pre-service teachers who had been involved in learning activities or international mobilities during a previous project phase. All participants reviewed project materials in advance and gave warm, so positive, or cold, which means critical feedback, in a guided group interview. We audio recorded this session and then applied inductive qualitative analysis with MaxQDA to identify key themes. And these findings were used to revise our conjecture map and to design a prototype. The first microcycle generated design principles for a DTL-focused curriculum. First, the program should include pre-service teachers in all subject areas, not just language specialists as it is. Research also shows that multilingual learners' outcomes suffer in any discipline when they lack the language support. Second, we adopted a technology-infused approach, which I already mentioned briefly. Every course in the program should integrate media-rich activities that address language diversity. For example, courses would include multilingual blogging, video projects, or synchronous and or asynchronous online discussions among learners. These should include modeling by instructors, hands-on practice by students, and guided reflection, all scaffolded developmentally. Third, we plan to leverage our university's digital tools to foster international collaboration in particular. By linking with partner institutions and schools abroad, pre-service teachers can work on joint projects and virtual exchanges, which then makes the translanguaging processes authentic. For example, local pre-service teachers might co-teach a lesson online with peers in another country using students' native languages in the process. Fourth, drawing on Garcia and others, we emphasize that translanguaging must be curriculum integrated and sustained. Short, isolated workshops are quite unlikely to build lasting skill or competencies. And instead, translanguaging practices must be embedded in regular assignments and in discussions. The active use of all languages should be a normal part of everyday learning tasks. Finally, we use constructive alignment to ensure consistency between goals, teaching activities, and the assessment. We identified relevant competencies such as intercultural understanding, plurilingual ability, digital literacy, and so on, from framework like the Council of Europe's reference framework of competencies for democratic culture and selected measurable objectives and rubrics. We also plan to measure motivation and engagement using established tools such as the intrinsic motivation inventory by Daisy and Ryan. Well, in the second microcycle, our Critical Friends workshop provided real-world feedback. The panel's warm, positive comments validated our direction. They saw value in addressing that language as a marker of social difference and in focusing social justice. They also encouraged our emphasis on digital internationalization, noting that virtual exchanges help when not all students can travel abroad for various reasons. Student participants in particular appreciated the research-based learning element. They felt supported to pursue their own interests in practice-based project and valued the consistent interaction with peers and faculty mentors. For example, one student said it was very effective that they first learned theoretically what research-based learning is, and then were given the opportunity to apply this practically with a research project related to multilingualism in the classroom. Another noted that it made sense to focus on final thesis projects, since teacher education systems differ across countries and theses allow for more flexibility. On the critical side, experts pointed out that we had used the terms multilingualism and translanguaging quite interchangeably, creating confusion. They suggested we make a clear conceptual shift, explicitly define translanguaging as a core perspective. They also cautioned that shifting entrenched attitudes, remember Gogolin's monolingual habitus, is quite a long-term process. Other feedback included practical suggestions. For example, one expert recommended building a digital repository for all project outputs, such as videos, lesson plans, etc., to share widely within the community. Students further emphasized that ambitious field research, for example, multilingual classroom studies abroad, will require robust support and mentoring, since unforeseen language use issues can arise. Well, we took all this input to refine our design conjecture map, which you can see here. And don't worry, you don't need to read everything on this slide now. I really wanted to give you an idea what conjecture mapping as a structured technique to make educational design decision explicit, and thus also create criticizable designs within the research community can look like. If that's interesting for you, please check out the paper, just if you would like to follow up on this more closely or also start a conversation with us. In this updated conjecture map, we explicitly moved from the broad term multilingualism to translanguaging as our guiding concept. We also highlighted the digital translanguaging as central, planning activities where language blending happens through technology. And also crucially, we decided to place more emphasis on student-led research projects and ensure strong mentor support, reflecting the workshop's insight. Using these conjectures, we then build a concrete program prototype that's also aligned with Folger et al.'s infusion model. It includes 5 distinguished course formats, 2 of which are already in operation. The teacher translanguaging camps, which you can see below, and comprising of intensive week-long workshops on translanguaging, and secondly the international research-based learning program where small groups conduct translanguaging research during their school placements or school internship over the course of 3 semesters. So this is quite a long-term endeavor actually. The other 3 formats are innovations in planning. One that you can see at the top is the Digital Translanguaging coffee breaks, short, regular online gatherings where pre-service teachers discuss language and tech use across contexts. And all these elements are nested sort of in a virtual community of practice. This provides a sustained online space for students, pre-service teachers, to share outputs from these courses, for example, videos or written reflections, and to network across cohorts also. Literature suggests that such virtual communities of practice with activities like virtual exchanges and collaborative projects can enhance teacher learning and connectedness. These preliminary results show how DBR aims to generate knowledge and design in tandem. In DBR, theory is not just a backdrop, but evolves through the design. For instance, our theoretical categories, multilingualism versus translanguaging, analog versus digital, actually emerged through the process. Were not just imposed upfront. And by iterating the design, we actually uncovered our own blind spots. Initially, we treated technology as a simple add-on or a substitution, but now, through iterating, we aim for digital translanguaging, reshaping tasks, and with a discourse moving from substitution to transformation. The virtual community of practice approach appears very promising. Well, a dedicated online community can bring together teacher candidates from different locations, enabling them to practice digital translanguaging together in authentic settings. The idea of digital translanguaging coffee breaks and structured with virtual exchanges draws on the notion that such communities can reduce professional isolation and foster connection. However, sustainability is a concern at this point. Many student members will cycle out each year, so we must thoughtfully scaffold the community's continuity and decide also how tightly it is structured. These considerations highlight the need for ongoing DBR iterations to refine the model and the infusion curriculum. Our work suggests that teacher education programs must interweave translanguaging and digital pedagogy to truly support multilingual learners. Focusing on students' full language resources is a matter of social justice. By infusing digital translanguaging practice into all subject courses and by modeling such practices ourselves, we aim to set a new norm for language-sensitive teaching. The infusion approach provides a blueprint for how to do this across a whole program. Moreover, the value of a virtual community of practice has broad implications. Our preliminary results align with findings like Ravi's. Teachers see virtual community of practice as effective for ongoing professional development. In particular, virtual communities of practice may be critical in supporting intercultural competencies, language awareness and empathy in teachers, which are cornerstones of democratic culture. We're now moving to implement individual concepts of the program to evaluate its impact. We will use validated frameworks, for example, the reference framework of Competencies for Democratic Culture and Instruments for Motivation and Engagement, to assess gains in digital translanguaging competencies. Finally, we acknowledge this is an early stage theory building phase. Consistent with DBR principles, our goal at this point is not broad generalizability, but producing design principles that others can adopt. Subsequent cycles and wider studies will test and refine these principles. Looking ahead, this DBR project will continue iterating its designs. Over the next few 4 years, we will implement all 5 course formats and gather data on their effectiveness. The virtual community of practice platform will grow as more students and faculty participate. We also plan to publicly share our lesson plans, videos and research tools in an online repository, and to help other educators replicate or adapt our model. Importantly, we will begin systematic evaluations, surveys, reflections and performance tasks to see how pre-service teachers' translanguaging competencies develop over time. We also aim to scale this approach. For example, after validating it in our context, we could adopt the model for other teacher education programs internationally. As new digital tools appear, for example, machine translation or social media, we could integrate them into the digital translanguaging strategies. And of course, we welcome collaboration. For instance, others could pilot similar communities or use our materials. Finally, by presenting here at EdMedia, we hope to spark discussion on multilingual digital pedagogy and to foster a community around these ideas. So much from my side. Thank you very much for watching my presentation, and all of us are very much looking forward to engaging with you in the asynchronous Q&A here on the conference platform. But also, please feel free to reach out via email or connect with us on social media. We'd be very happy to continue the conversation with you.